Chapter 6: Roads of Blood and Fire. Upon arriving, he found the tribe's warriors alongside a group of strangers. In the clearing, Leonard de Doldia, the warrior responsible for the tribe's security, was exchanging blows with an unknown man. Instinctively, Rigger activated his magic eye. The world around him shifted. The stranger was tall and athletic, with black hair tied into a ponytail and a focused posture. He wielded a long, elegant sword that seemed to dance through the air. His movements were precise, combining direct strikes with a fluid style that Rigger couldn't entirely recognize. There was something deeply unsettling about him, a strange, instinctual feeling Rigger couldn't quite explain. The fighters exchanged intense, but clearly friendly blows. The sound of steel clashing reverberated through the air, and the crowd watched in fascination. Yet, Rigger felt something stirring deep within him, an aggression that began to take over his senses. When Leonard stepped back after deflecting a particularly quick strike, Rigger couldn't hold back any longer. Letting out a roar, he charged at the swordsman with explosive force, aiming directly for his throat. Rigger's attack was swift, but the stranger didn't flinch. Instead, another figure intercepted him. Before he could land his strike, Rigger was firmly grabbed and thrown to the ground in a motion as smooth as a flowing river. He tried to resist, but the strength holding him down was unshakable. "Calm down, boy," said a deep, commanding voice. "No one here is your enemy." Looking up, Rigger saw an older man with short, graying brown hair and an imposing presence. He held his sheathed sword at his side, clearly ready to act if needed, though his expression remained calm and controlled. "Rigger!" Leonard rushed over, placing a firm hand on the young boy's shoulder. "Stop this. They are not enemies, it's just a friendly sparring match." Rigger was breathing heavily, shame burning his face as he slowly stood, avoiding the eyes of those around him. "I'm sorry, it was instinctive." "Huh! You try to kill me over an instinct," scoffed the swordsman. Leonard, still stern, crossed his arms. "If he did, it's because he saw something in you that we don't. Our instincts rarely fail." The swordsman raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. Instead, he turned his attention to the other members of his group, gathered a bit farther back. As tensions eased, Fendrel formally introduced himself and his group to the villagers. "I am Fendrel Ashbrand, the leader of this group, the Red Dragon's Breath. A pleasure to finally meet you all," he began, smiling warmly as he addressed the wary villagers. "We are rank S adventurers, and our journey began with a rescue mission. However, what brought us here goes beyond that." Pausing, he observed their reactions before continuing. "I am a sword saint, and my mission started when a beast folk slave saved my life during a battle. I was gravely wounded, and despite her terrible condition, she cared for me. Before her death, she asked me to free her son and bring him back to the Great Forest. Upon arriving here, we learned of the challenges your tribe is facing. We couldn't simply walk away. That's why I've decided to help, and my group chose to follow me here." Fendrel's gaze softened as he looked at Rigger, as if wanting the boy to understand his intentions. "The debt is mine, and I see it as my responsibility to repay it." He gestured toward his companions. Darien, the swordsman, gave a simple bow. "I'm Darien, swordsman, not as skilled as Fendrel, but my blade is sharp." Irina, the elven archer, spoke with an indifferent tone. "I'm Irina, archer." She eyed Rigger, noting the distrust still present in his gaze. Gorin, the dwarf, raised his voice jovially, trying to lighten the atmosphere. "Name's Gorin, the drunkard of the forge. Not a saint, but good with an axe and a barrel of ale." Marla, the healer, followed with a calming presence. "I'm Marla, healer. If anyone needs care, I'm here." Lastly, a halfling introduced himself with a mischievous grin. Zen, thief, a young beast-folk child hiding behind him, piped up shyly. "I'm Jannar." The village's reception was far from warm. Despite Jannar's account, which confirmed Fendrel's story and eased some tension, the villagers remained skeptical. Having lived in isolation and with internal struggles, they watched the adventurers' every move with suspicion. Outsiders weren't easily trusted, especially during such uncertain times. Who are these people? What do they want here? One elder murmured, glaring at the group. Our tribe has its own warriors. We don't need strangers. Even with Fendral's explanation, doubt lingered. It was hard for the villagers to believe that a group of adventurers would come all this way out of pure altruism. Rigger felt the unease in the air. He too harbored reservations, particularly about the swordsman Darien, whose earlier sparring match had set him on edge. Yet, Fendral's calm demeanor and sincerity made Rigger hesitate in outright dismissing him. Over the days that followed, Rigger observed the adventurers closely. Darien was almost too composed, revealing little about himself. Irina maintained a detached curiosity about the villagers, never venturing too close. The others, more willing to engage, were met with cool politeness but little warmth. Still, Rigger couldn't shake the feeling that Fendrel carried a unique burden, one that resonated with him. Perhaps there was more to this group than met the eye. As the days passed, Rigger began to hope the tribe's warriors would return soon. Their presence would make him feel more secure amidst the growing tension. One day, during one of his training sessions, Fendrel watched as Rigger moved with the natural weapons inherited from his Doldia lineage. His sharp claws and the instinctive agility of his body allowed him to adapt to improvised combat styles. Fendrel crossed his arms, studying the young warrior as he blocked and dodged Geru's attacks. "You have what I'd call natural talent," Fendrel remarked. Rigger paused, looking at him curiously. "Talent for what?" "For the sword god style. It's the way you move, direct, efficient, focused on ending a fight with a single lethal blow." Though Fendrel seemed impressed, he didn't dwell on the comment. To him, talent only mattered if paired with hard work. Don't let it go to your head. Talent is just a seed. Whether it grows depends entirely on you. Rigger didn't respond. While he enjoyed using a sword, he found it far easier to improve by fighting with his claws and fists. As the weeks went by, Rigger became more involved in the village's daily routines, including helping younger children learn the basics of combat and patrolling the area. Initially, it was just a distraction, something to fill his time when he wasn't training with Geru or pushing his own limits. But soon, he realized he enjoyed teaching. "Focus on your balance," Rigger told a small group. "If your feet aren't steady, any strike will throw you off." The children looked up to him with admiration, eagerly mimicking his stances and movements. Despite his youth, Rigger already stood out as someone with the strength and skill of a seasoned warrior. As the months passed and he turned 5, Celine held a small celebration for just the two of them. She gifted him a ring engraved with a wolf design. The adventurers were gradually integrating into the village's routine. Rigger, though still wary of Darien, began training regularly with Fendrel. Despite his growing respect for the group leader, Rigger couldn't ignore something peculiar. Whenever he activated his magic eye during their training sessions, he noticed Fendral's battle aura was unlike anything he had ever seen. "It's sharp," Rigger reflected during a break. "Every movement is like a blade, but controlled. It's as if he doesn't waste a single drop of energy." One day, after an especially intense sparring session, Fendrel commented, "You've got monstrous strength for someone your age." He rubbed his shoulder where a strike from Rigger's claws had torn part of his light armor. "If you learn to control it, you could become something truly dangerous in a good way." Rigger felt a mix of pride and frustration. Despite his strength, he knew Fendrel still outclassed him in technique and experience. "My strength means nothing if I can't use it properly," he thought. During training, Rigger began to blend his natural grappling knowledge, something he had learned in his past life, with the instinctive combat techniques of his new body. In one bout, he managed to take down the veteran swordsman by grabbing his arm during an attack, twisting his body, and pinning him to the ground. Of course, he knew that if Fendrel had been serious, his head would have been severed before he realized it. "Interesting," Fendrel said as he stood up with a grin. "You don't limit yourself to one style. That flexibility will take you far." "It's not like I choose to do this," Rigger replied, panting. "It feels like my body just reacts." "Then start training your reactions too," Fendrel retorted. "Reacting without thought is useful, but reacting with intent is what separates a common fighter from a master." Apparently, There were two kinds of warriors, instinctual and rational. Fendrel categorized Rigger as a pure instinctual fighter and noted that, while this approach made initial progress easier, it wouldn't take him as far in the long run. Beyond combat, Rigger began practicing chantless magic, something he still didn't fully understand. During a solitary training session, he focused on channeling mana into a simple fire lance spell. By concentrating all his energy into a single burst, the spell became intense and powerful, but left him exhausted. "I need more control," Rigger muttered to himself as he watched the smoke slowly dissipate. "The more mana I pour in, the stronger the spell gets. This could be useful for short battles, but I need to find a way to use it strategically." Over time, he realized he could quickly deplete his mana reserves by overloading spells. This prompted him to think of new ways to combine his combat abilities with magic, something that could become a decisive advantage. In one of the rare moments of rest, Rigger sat beside his mother, Celine, as she wove a fishing net. He hesitated before speaking. "Mom, have you ever felt like you weren't yourself? Like something inside you was pushing you to do things you didn't understand?" Celine paused, looking at him with a warm, understanding smile. "Sometimes," she replied. "I think it's part of who we are, Rigger. That wildness. Some are born with more of it, others with less. We're connected to nature, and nature isn't always rational. But you have something special. You have a choice." Rigger was silent for a moment. "Mom, can you teach me how to cook?" She burst out laughing. Her words lingered in Rigger's mind, echoing as he continued his training and patrols around the village. As time passed, Fendrel gradually earned the trust of the tribe's leaders. The adventurer leader maintained a friendly and respectful demeanor, never forcing interactions. He respected Rigger's space and often engaged in small conversations about combat and strategy with the warriors, asking about the tribe's fighting styles without ever questioning Gustav Didoldia's authority. Rigger was surprised by Fendrel's approach. His mother and Verdia had told him that sword god-style practitioners were usually arrogant and unrestrained. Yet, Fendrel didn't act superior. He was more of a battle companion. He corrected Rigger's movements gently, never in a rush to teach, but always with wise words. As the days went by, Rigger trained with Fendrel more often. He didn't know exactly what to expect, but the experience was overwhelmingly positive. Fendrel's technique was refined, and Rigger learned a great deal just by observing him. Rigger realized that Fendrel wasn't just a skilled swordsman, but also an incredible strategist. Sometimes, when Fendrel demonstrated more advanced techniques, Rigger felt as though he was missing something, as if failing at something that should have been simple. But instead of becoming frustrated, he dedicated himself even more to his training. With every sparring match, he felt something changing inside him, though he couldn't yet identify what it was. "You're already at an advanced level, Rigger, at least in your style," Fendrel once commented after an intense training session. "But you need to learn to control not just your strength, but also your emotions. Battle isn't just about brute force. Like I said, you've gotten this far relying purely on instinct, but it'll be hard to progress much further that way." "I know," Rigger replied, breathing heavily. "It's hard not to follow my instincts when they feel like the best move in a fight. It's been years since I left the Sword Sanctuary, but I heard there's a new Sword King called the Black Wolf. She's also from the Beast race. I don't know if she had the same problem, but if you ever want to advance further, you could seek her out or go directly to the Sword Sanctuary. You might even have a chance to become the Sword God's disciple." Each day, Rigger became more aware of how far he was from mastering his strength. But training with Fendrel was the right path. He could pinpoint Rigger's mistakes and tell him exactly what needed to be done to improve further. Rigger was steadily becoming a stronger leader, increasingly aware of his abilities. His training sessions with the village children continued, but now he incorporated techniques he had learned from Fendrel, blending grappling maneuvers into his combat style. His ability to immobilize opponents before delivering a decisive blow was unconventional but remarkably effective. He noticed that his beastly nature was becoming harder to control, yet it seemed to manifest precisely when he needed it most. Over time, Rigger also grew closer to Irina, the elven archer from Fendrel's group. Initially cold and distant, she eventually warmed up when she realized that he was simply curious about her mentor, Verdia. Now he knew her full name, Verdia Solarion. The forest was quiet that night. Rigger's footsteps were muffled by the dense undergrowth, his senses sharpened by months of training and patrols. He moved cautiously, yet his mind remained on high alert. Slave traffickers and smugglers still posed a constant threat in the area, and his mission was clear: patrol and protect the village. As he neared the forest's edge, where the terrain opened up, distant voices caught his attention, sharpening his hearing. His magical eye activated instinctively, and his vision focused on the source of the sound. For figures moved briskly through a clearing, their pace urgent. Rigger crouched low, hidden among the foliage, and observed. What he saw made his jaw tighten with restrained anger. 2 smugglers were carrying beast children, bound and teary-eyed. A wounded beast woman was slung over one man's shoulder, her body limp. The other man held her upright by a rope tied around her neck. The children, though visibly terrified, resisted as much as they could, their defiance a testament to their spirit despite their dire situation. Slavers, Rigger thought, his blood boiling. They won't leave here alive. With his heart pounding, he activated his magic eye and locked onto his targets. His perception sharpened, and the metallic tang of blood and the acrid stench of sweat mixed with fear filled his senses. 2 of the men carried swords and appeared reasonably skilled, though still no match for him. Nonetheless, caution was essential. The man leading the group barked, "Hurry up! The crossing will be tough if we don't move faster." The other man glanced around nervously, but kept walking. "Damn beast folk. One more ambush, and we're done for. Let's get this over with." Rigger crept closer, a shadow in the darkness. With a deep, guttural growl, he unleashed his howling magic. A powerful, deafening wave of sound rippled through the clearing. The smugglers staggered, clutching their ears as they reeled from the sonic assault. The beast children and woman winced, but the slavers were left completely vulnerable. Rigger pounced like a predator from the shadows, moving with surprising speed for someone his size. His first target, a man wielding dual swords, tried to react but was too slow. Rigger's clawed hand wrapped around his throat, his sharp nails digging into flesh. A savage smile crossed Rigger's face as his beastly instincts took over. With a brutal squeeze, his claws tore through the man's neck, ripping flesh and severing arteries. The slaver crumpled to the ground, lifeless. Nearby, the second swordsman, still dazed, struggled to regain his footing. Rigger turned to him with predatory precision, conjuring a flaming spear in his hand. Without hesitation, he hurled the spear, and it struck the man square in the chest. The explosion of flames consumed him in an instant, his screams echoing into the night. The remaining 2 slavers panicked. One attempted to flee, but Rigger was faster. He sprinted after the man, tackling him with monstrous strength. Pinning him against a tree, Rigger's claws tore into his throat, silencing him forever. The final slaver, desperate, drew a knife and turned toward the beast woman. She was too weak to resist as he raised the blade, but before it could descend, Rigger was there. In a blur, he struck the man with an open-handed claw swipe, the force enough to send him sprawling. The knife clattered to the ground, and Rigger delivered a final, fatal blow. The clearing grew silent except for the labored breathing of the rescued captives. Rigger turned to the children and the beast woman, his earlier rage subsiding. His predatory expression softened as he crouched near them. "You're safe now," he said, his voice low but steady, as he began to heal their wounds with magic. Cutting their bonds carefully, he freed them. The children, still trembling, stared at him with wide, tear-filled eyes. The beast woman, though gravely injured, managed a faint smile of gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. Rigger nodded solemnly. He picked up the 2 children, cradling them gently in his arms as the woman limped alongside him, following his lead back towards safety. His thoughts churned. This was his first kill, yet it felt natural, instinctual, a necessary act to protect those who couldn't defend themselves. but a small, primal part of him relished the hunt. Months passed with several small skirmishes around the village. Each time, the tribe's warriors swiftly handled the threats. Finally, the expeditionary warriors returned to the village. Their arrival brought both relief and unease. Exhaustion was etched into their faces, and it was clear that their journey had been grueling. Rigger stood beside Fendrell as the returning warriors entered. The initial tension between the tribe and the adventurers had eased over time, thanks in no small part to Fendrell's calm demeanor and their actions in protecting the village. Gustav, the village chief, exchanged a knowing look with Fendrell before addressing Rigger. "Come with us. You've earned your place in this meeting," Gustav said. Rigger nodded, his resolve hardening. Whatever news the warriors had brought back, he was ready to face it. The weight of responsibility hung heavy in the air, but for Rigger, it was yet another step on his path to becoming stronger, for his tribe and for himself. Chapter 7: The Shadow of War. The familiar figures of Guys, Hantar, and a small group of warriors appeared on the horizon. In the village, murmurs of anticipation quickly gave way to worried expressions. Children ran to their mothers, while the elders exchanged tense glances. Guys, the seasoned tribal veteran, walked at the forefront, his demeanor serious and his eyes scanning the village. Beside him, Hantar bore the hardened expression of someone who had faced difficult days. Their leather armor was worn, marked with fresh battle scars that told their own story. Gustav, the tribe's leader, quickly approached, his eyes scrutinizing the group. "Just you." His voice came out colder than he intended, but the question was unavoidable. Guys stopped and motioned for the other warriors to disperse and rest. Turning to Gustav, he responded gravely. "The others stay behind. There were many problems." Hantar, standing beside him, added, "We found clear signs of movement from the underworld. Large groups, too large for us to face directly. Part of our group remained at the borders to monitor them, but we don't know if they'll return." Guys finished, his voice heavy with the weight of uncertainty. The news hit the village like a stone. Villagers began murmuring, and a tense atmosphere spread quickly. Some mothers clutched their children tightly, while others searched for answers in the warriors' eyes. Gustav stood silent for a moment, assessing the situation before commanding. "Come to the central tent. We need to discuss this immediately." "Fendrell, Rigger, you're coming too?" "Who are they?" Guys asked sharply, glaring at Fendrell and his group, his body tense. After months of fighting slavers, it was difficult to mask his bloodlust and disdain. Gustav cut him off. "They've been helping defend the tribe these past months. So wipe that look off your face and offer your thanks." Hearing this, the warriors calmed, and Guys offered an apology. Inside the central tent, the atmosphere was heavy. Besides Gustav, Guys, and Hantar, several of the tribe's most experienced warriors were present. Rigger had been allowed to participate due to his strength and recent contributions. It was the first time he had witnessed something so serious, but he knew this was an important moment to understand what was happening. Gustav looked directly at Guys. "Explain in detail. What did you see?" Guys crossed his arms, taking a deep breath before replying. "We found organized groups at key points along the borders. These aren't just merchants or common hunters. They carry symbols of known underworld factions. They're armed and appear to be preparing for something big. We tried to send messages to other tribes, but we've received no response." Hantar added, "The worst part is that they know about us. We encountered ambushes and signs that they've been monitoring our movements, and they don't seem to care that we're aware of it." Gustav furrowed his brow, processing the information. "And the rest of the group? Why do they stay behind?" "They volunteered to continue surveillance and buy us time. They're also tasked with warning us if anything happens. We know the risks, but we had no other choice," Guys replied, his tone laced with regret. As the adults discussed, Rigger couldn't shake a feeling of urgency. He recalled the stories about slavers but had never imagined the threat could be so close. His mind raced as he decided to speak up. "If we know where they are, why don't we strike first?" Rigger asked, his voice cutting through the tension in the tent. All eyes turned to him. Some were surprised, others skeptical. Guys looked at the young warrior with a firm expression, though not disdainful. Attacking now would be suicide. They need so much preparation because we have the advantage in these forests. If we attack recklessly, we'll lose that edge. We don't know how many there are or how well-equipped they might be. Hantar nodded in agreement. We need more information before acting. Any rash move could cost us dearly. Despite their words, Rigger felt that something was being withheld. The meeting dragged on as Gustav and the other leaders debated their next steps. The possibility of an attack on the village seemed increasingly real, and the distrust toward the recently arrived adventurers only added to the tension. When the meeting finally concluded, Guys placed a hand on Rigger's shoulder as they exited the tent. You're growing fast, boy. But remember, patience is as powerful a weapon as strength. Rigger nodded, though his clenched fists betrayed his lingering unease. As night fell, the young warrior couldn't help but look toward the horizon, where the other tribal warriors still remained. Perhaps they were fighting for their lives. He also thought constantly of his master, Rudeus. Were the elves facing something similar? Worry gnawed at him. He knew that sooner or later, it would be his turn to confront the looming war. While the village remained on high alert, Rigger exhausted his mana reserves by practicing earth magic, making it as dense and rigid as possible. He was confident he could already use a saint-level spell, but lacking a proper benchmark made it hard to gauge his current capabilities. He was about to cast another spell when his heightened hearing detected movement several hundred meters away, far from the tribe. Approaching stealthily, he saw Zen, the halfling rogue. He almost called out but paused. What was Zen doing here? Without drawing attention, Rigger followed him through the forest, hiding in the shadows. When they reached a clearing, Rigger watched as Zen exchanged signals with hooded figures. He could clearly hear murmurs about the village and its weaknesses. Anger flared in his chest, and it took every ounce of self-control to keep him from leaping forward and tearing them apart. He knew that confronting Zen directly would be unwise. Instead, this information had to remain a secret. He waited for the right moment and then returned to the village, where he confided in Guys and the tribal leaders about what he had witnessed. Gustav immediately devised a plan to capture Zen and his allies by surprise, ensuring they remained unaware they'd been discovered. They decided to inform Fendrell as well, reasoning that if he had wanted to harm the tribe, he could have assassinated the leaders quietly and escaped. Fendrell was visibly shaken upon learning of Zen's betrayal. He assured Gustav that the treachery was isolated and reaffirmed the loyalty of Darien, whom he had known since childhood and trusted with his life, as well as Irina, his lover, who had as much to lose as the tribe's residents due to being an elf. Even so, it was decided that only Fendrell would be privy to Zen's betrayal. With the growing need for protection, Rigger decided to begin training the children he deemed most mana-attuned in magic. His physical and combat training had been progressing well, but he wasn't sure if everyone would excel in magic. To test his theory, he chose Killian, 5 years old, Lysena, 4 years old, and Taze, 7 years old, the 3 children with the greatest amount of mana and potential. If guided properly, they could become a significant asset to the tribe. Rigger started with simple instructions on beginner-level water magic, using this opportunity to test a theory he had recently developed about magic in general. If he was right, he was confident he could become a pioneering force in the magic of this new world. Hantar was hurled into the air, caught in the impact of a fiery explosion. Rigger emerged from the flames, his skin scorched, but his eyes fierce with determination. A roar echoed as he unleashed his howling magic in quick succession. Hanar was momentarily stunned mid-air before hitting the ground. When he regained his bearings, Rigger was already on top of him, his claws hovering mere centimeters from his jugular. The clearing was silent, broken only by their heavy breathing. Too fast. Hantar muttered. Do you yield? Rigger asked, his teeth clenched. Hantar let out a short laugh, filled with pride and surprise. All right, boy. I yield. Rigger stepped back, releasing his father, and exhaled deeply, a victorious smile spreading across his face. His mother, Celine, clapped enthusiastically, while Fendrell whistled in approval. "You're really growing, Geru," his sword instructor remarked with a thoughtful gaze. "But remember, defeating your father once doesn't mean you've surpassed him." "He's right," Hantar added, standing with some difficulty. "But it was a good fight. I'd say, your best so far." Rigger nodded, trying to conceal the pride that burned within him. For a brief moment, he was not just a young apprentice. He was a true warrior. The shadow of night blanketed the forest canopy as Rigger and 3 other warriors moved silently under the faint glow of the moonlight. Rigger had his magic eye activated, scanning the surroundings for suspicious movement. Beside him, Geru led the formation with steady steps, while 2 other warriors held the rear. "These tracks are fresh," Geru said, crouching to inspect the ground. "Looks like they're trying to lure us somewhere. Or maybe they're just fleeing," Rigger replied, though the unease in his voice was evident. A distant snap froze the group. It wasn't the natural sound of breaking branches. It was deliberate. "Spread out," Geru commanded in a low voice. The battle erupted suddenly, like thunder shattering the silence of the night. The intruders advanced swiftly, but Rigger was prepared. Using his magic eye, he immediately detected the movement patterns and positions of the enemies. Each step, every motion, was clear to him, as though a web of energy illuminated the battlefield. With a primal roar, he charged forward, already conjuring earthen spears that erupted from the ground toward the invaders. The stone's impact echoed through the forest, forcing the enemies to dodge. Rigger seized the moment, casting advanced fire magic, Flame Slice, with a swift motion of his hands. The flaming blade sliced through the air, striking one man diagonally and leaving a searing cut across his chest. The explosion of fire hurled him backward, screaming as the ground around him cracked from the force. But there was no time to revel in the success, for more enemies charged with renewed ferocity. Rigger surged ahead, his sharp claws gleaming in the moonlight. He grabbed the wrist of an enemy, an armored man, and, with a fluid motion, disarmed him. In a single turn, he twisted the man's arm and slammed him into the ground with a resounding thud. The enemy was left vulnerable and stunned. Without hesitation, Rigger pounced, sinking his claws into the man's throat. The move was swift and brutal, leaving no room for defense. He felt the life drain from the body beneath him, but his instincts didn't let him stop. The thrill of the hunt clouded his senses, driving him to be fiercer, deadlier. As he stood, another enemy lunged with a sharp blade aimed at his neck. Rigger ducked, letting the blade pass over his head, and retaliated with a powerful kick to the attacker's knee. The man stumbled forward, and Rigger leaped onto him, tearing him apart with his claws like a predator overpowering its prey. Nearby, the other warriors fought with equal intensity. One sliced through an enemy's neck with a clean sword strike, while Geru disarmed opponents with precise cuts, targeting vital points. But the enemies weren't simple foes, for more remained standing, and the battle was far from over. Rigger, now in a near-trance state, fought with savage precision. His strikes became faster, more instinctive. His mind blurred as his body moved on autopilot, driven purely by the need to dominate the battlefield. As another enemy tried to attack from behind, Rigger spun around, grabbing the man's shoulders and slashing his neck with his claws. Then it happened. One of the tribe's warriors, approaching to celebrate the victory, placed a hand on Rigger's shoulder. Reflexively, Rigger spun and delivered a violent kick to the warrior's chest. The impact hurled the man backward, slamming him into a tree with a dull thud. "Rigger!" Geru's voice rang out, sharp and commanding. Rigger stopped abruptly, mere steps from his ally. Realization struck him like a lightning bolt, and his eyes widened in horror. His blood still roared in his veins, but something deep inside broke as he saw the damage he had inflicted. Rushing to the fallen warrior, who was struggling to rise, Rigger immediately cast healing magic, his hands trembling as the energy flowed into the injured man. The wounds closed, but the guilt in Rigger's heart remained raw. I'm so sorry," Rigger whispered, his voice thick with remorse. The warrior, still dazed, looked up at him with a mix of confusion and understanding. It's fine, he croaked. You were in combat mode. That wasn't you. Rigger swallowed hard, trying to regain his composure. He glanced around, seeing the other warriors watching him with a mix of respect and wariness. The battle had been won, but Rigger had glimpsed a far greater conflict brewing within himself. Chapter 8 Limits of Magic, Prelude to the Storm. The day was clear, but something in the air felt heavy. The Doldia village, always busy and welcoming, seemed different to Rigger. As he walked along the trails that cut through the huts, he felt the gazes. Many were still warm looks of recognition and admiration, but there were also cautious, even distrustful glances. Since the incident during the patrol, when his instincts overtook him and he attacked one of his allies, the respect he had earned began to crumble. Although the attack hadn't caused serious harm, the act itself was enough to plant doubts in the tribe's mind. He wasn't blaming them, though. He had always managed to stay in control, but lately he wasn't as sure. He was more afraid of losing his rationality than they were. While his thoughts tormented him, he spotted guys in the distance, standing near one of the watchtowers. The chief of the warriors stared at him with a serious expression. When their gazes met, guys gestured for him to come over. Rigger approached without saying anything. Guys led him to a more secluded spot where no one would overhear them. The silence between the two was heavy, and Guys finally broke it, his voice firm. "Rigger, can we talk?" Guys asked bluntly. The young man nodded, feeling the weight of the words even before hearing them. Guys looked at him with a mix of respect and concern. "I heard from Geru about your incident. This is not something to be taken lightly." "I know." Rigger's voice was a whisper. "It felt like I couldn't think, like my body was moving on its own." Guy sighed, crossing his arms. "That's what worries me. You remind me of someone. Do you know that?" Rigger looked up, surprised. "Oh, my sister Ghislaine." The name made Rigger frown. He had heard stories about Ghislaine de Doldia, but rarely did anyone speak of her directly. "What does she have to do with me?" "Ghislaine was like you. Too strong, too wild. Since she was little, she was faster, more agile, and fiercer than any of us." Guys paused, looking at the horizon as if reliving old memories. "She barely learned to speak the beast god language. She usually solved things with her fists, always fighting, always challenging everyone around her. Then, when a wandering swordsman passed through here, she left with him." "And you think I'm like her?" Rigger asked defensively. "Not completely. You're different. You're intelligent, rational. You have the ability to learn and think beyond your instincts. But those same instincts are even stronger than hers, and your strength also far exceeds hers." Rigger felt a weight in his chest. Guys' words weren't said with anger, but with genuine concern. "What does that mean?" Rigger asked, with a mix of challenge and hesitation in his voice. "It means that, as much as I see your potential, I have to be honest." Guys clenched his fists, his eyes showing reluctance. "Ghislaine could be controlled. She wasn't as strong as you. Your potential becomes something dangerous instead of something good. What I mean is, no matter how many contributions you make to the tribe, if one day I believe that you are a threat to us, I will have to ask you to leave." The words hit Rigger like a blow. "I don't want that. I don't wish for that." Guys hesitated, his voice heavy with regret. "But as the next leader, I need to protect our tribe above all else." Rigger didn't answer. He remained silent as Guys walked away, leaving him alone with his thoughts. Rigger found an isolated spot near a stream, far from the village. He needed to think. Am I just a beast? He was reincarnated, and although he had realized his instincts early on, he always thought his rationality and adult maturity would prevail. But was that really the case? Is my place really here? These questions burned in his mind. He thought of his previous life, of who he was as a human. There, he had control. He had logic and reason. Here, however, it seemed like his instincts were always lurking, ready to take over. Am I a human reincarnated trying to live as a Doldia? Or am I a Doldia fighting against what I really am? These reflections led him to think of his mother. When Rigger got home, his mother immediately noticed something was wrong. She stopped what she was doing and walked over to him. "Rigger, what happened?" He hesitated but eventually told her everything. The looks from the tribe, the conversation with guys, and his own fears. Mom, what if I really am a danger? What if I end up like a beast? His mother cupped his face with both hands, forcing him to look directly at her. Rigger, you're my son. No matter what happens, you will always be my son. But what if I can't control it? Then we'll work on it together. She smiled, a warm smile that seemed to chase away all the shadows. You're not alone, Rigger. You'll never be. Those words brought him some comfort. He knew he wouldn't resolve this problem so easily, but as Celine said, he had people who would help him. For the first time, it sparked curiosity in him. Why did he come to this world? Was it for a purpose? Was it by chance? He didn't know, and honestly, he wasn't sure if he wanted to find out. Later, Rigger joined his subordinates. He started calling them that because they asked him to, and they were increasingly acting like an organized group. As Rigger instilled discipline and knowledge during their training, they realized that they weren't living in easy times, and they adapted to this reality. His group was already 50 members strong, with 5 main leaders commanding 9 others. As for his magic apprentices, Ghislaine, Lysena, and Taze, the training was becoming more serious, and results were starting to show. Ghislaine, the most promising, could already cast magic without chanting, something that impressed Rigger. Lysena was also close to reaching that level, while Taze was still struggling with the basics. Good job, Ghislaine, Rigger said, trying not to show favoritism. But remember, it's not just about power. Control is equally important. Okay, now can you teach me fire magic? Sure, I said I'd teach you once you mastered the chantless magic. But remember, fire is different from water, earth, and wind. You could hurt yourself if you get it wrong. As he trained the children, an idea began to form in his mind. The ideas about mana and magic he had theorized seemed to be correct. Mana reserves, for example, seemed to grow in childhood, contrary to what magicians believed. And from Ghislaine's example, and soon Lysena's as well, chantless magic followed the same pattern. Even if only the most talented might learn it, it would still be a drastic change to the magical and combat systems in this world. If this knowledge was wrong, what else could be? He decided that he needed to experiment more, think outside the box. Perhaps the limitations of magic were more psychological than real. And if that was truly the case, he was confident in his creativity to create all kinds of magic. While he was reflecting on this, 2 little girls appeared, both around 3 years old. The one with cat ears, with her arrogant posture and nose in the air, approached with confidence. Are you Rigger? She asked, arms crossed. Yes. And who are you? I'm Linnea. And this here is Persina. She pointed to the other child, who had drooping dog ears and was absent-mindedly chewing a piece of meat. Rigger chuckled to himself. Well, what do I owe the pleasure? I'm Linnea Didoldia, daughter of the future tribe chief, and I'm generously allowing you to teach us magic, Linnea said arrogantly, though her arms cross-pose only made her look cute. Persina nodded her head, looking interested. I decided to give them a lesson now, so they wouldn't get caught off guard by life in the future. At dusk, a secret meeting was called by the tribe's elders, including Gustav, Guys, and some of the main warriors. To his surprise, Rigger was invited to attend. In the cabin where they gathered, there was a rudimentary map of the region sketched on a table, with stones marking critical areas. Gustav, the tribe leader, began. We've received alarming information from the elves of the neighboring forests. Like us, they've been dealing with constant infiltrations by trafficker groups. These attacks are not random. They're testing us, looking for weaknesses. Rigger felt a chill down his spine hearing this. His mind immediately went to Verdia, his mentor, who was protecting their homeland. And what about ours? He asked. Until now, we've been able to maintain control. Gustav replied in a deep voice. But we know it's just a matter of time before they try something bigger. That's why we'll anticipate the attack. He pointed to the map, where a set of stones marked the tribe's borders. We'll make it look like we're gathering warriors to attack the trafficker bases just before the seasonal rains begin. However, that will only be a distraction. Guys completed the plan with a tense smile. Actually, we'll keep our best warriors hidden in the village. When the enemies come, thinking we're vulnerable, We'll wipe them all out in one fell swoop. There was a moment of silence as everyone processed the plan. It was risky, but it made sense. Rigger narrowed his eyes. Zen? Fendrel, the leader of the adventurer group where Zen had infiltrated, nodded gravely. We know he's passing on information, so we'll use that to our advantage. He'll send false reports about our movements to lure the enemies into the trap. It was an intelligent plan, but Rigger knew that its success depended on everyone's execution. After the meeting, Rigger threw himself even deeper into his training. He began to learn the sword styles more seriously, thinking that relying only on his instincts could become even more dangerous. Dividing his time between the sword god style with Fendrel and the northern god style with Geru, he began to perceive the limits and advantages of each technique. While training with Fendrel, Rigger noticed something intriguing. In moments of high tension or concentration, he would unconsciously activate his battle aura, as if it were a natural reflex. However, trying to use it consciously was a completely different experience. The sensation was like trying to hold an uncontrollable flow of energy, something he couldn't direct or maintain for long. Even with all Fendrel's explanations and demonstrations, the process seemed almost like a puzzle. He didn't understand how his mentor could summon and control the aura with such precision, as if it were an extension of his own will. I'm still far off, Rigger thought, clenching his fists, determined to overcome this challenge. What would be possible if I combined the speed of the sword god with the unpredictability of the northern god? The idea of creating his own style wasn't new, but now it seemed more tangible. He realized that magic was heavily constrained by stigmas, and sword styles might be the same. After all, he knew that in his previous world, there were hundreds, if not thousands, of different martial arts. He knew he would have to learn everything he could before embarking on this path. Additionally, in his practice with magic, he experimented by combining earth and fire magic. The idea of creating lava had seemed absurd at first, but he managed some small successes. Magic is more flexible than we think. Maybe it's possible to completely rewrite what we know about it. These experiments filled him with determination. He was starting to see his strength not just as a weapon, but as a tool for change. With the young apprentices, Rigger became even firmer. He knew that to protect them, he had to instill discipline and responsibility in them. He had called Irina, the archer from the group, to teach the basics of archery to the children who were interested. Considering the difficult times ahead, she was happy to help. No matter how talented you are, without discipline, talent is nothing, he would often repeat. Killian, who had already mastered silent magic, received special attention. This is just the beginning. Don't slack off in your sword training. Physical combat is just as, if not more important than magic. Losing control of magic can be more dangerous than failing to cast it. Lysena, who was close to reaching this level, was showing signs of frustration. Don't compare yourself to others. Everyone has their own pace, Rigger advised, though he knew his words sounded empty to a child. Taze, on the other hand, was the most challenging. Though he worked hard, he clearly struggled with the fundamentals. I can't do it, he exclaimed during a training session. Rigger approached him. Don't say that. I can see with my own eyes that your mana is getting more familiar with the process. At this point, he was almost sure that the younger the student, the easier it was to teach them magic. In addition to the three, Linnea and Persina, his new students began to approach more. Linnea, though only 3 years old, exhibited a striking arrogance. I'm Linnea Didoldia, heir to the chief. I don't need lessons. Rigger laughed. Heir or not, everyone starts somewhere. And with that attitude, it looks like you didn't learn your lesson last time, he said, as balls of mud began to form in his hands while he walked toward her. Dashed. Persina, with her piece of meat always in hand, was quieter but watched everything with interest. I train after I eat, she stated before taking another bite. The two were different challenges, but Rigger knew he needed to integrate them into the group. They would be important in the future, of that he was certain. As the days passed, the tension in the village increased. The warriors were restless, and the news from the elves kept everyone on high alert. Rigger, for his part, did his best to prepare. Between training, magic experiments, and reflections on who he was, He knew the confrontation was approaching, and when the time came, he would be ready. Current status: Fire Magic, Advanced. Earth Magic, Advanced. Water Magic, Intermediate. Wind Magic, Intermediate. Healing Magic, Intermediate. Detoxification Magic, Beginner. Howling Magic, Minor Mastery. Merge Spells: Lava Ball, Mud Field, Mud Trap. Northern God Style, Intermediate. Sword God Style, Intermediate. Combat with natural weapons, claws, instincts, etc. Advanced. Intellectual skills: Reading and writing in Beast God language and human language. Mathematics, University level. Practical skills: Excellent hunter, good teacher, horrible cook.